but I do want to remind you that you can submit questions at any point of this presentation by typing your questions in the question box and pressing send. And I'd like to remind us to not forget to thank all of our 2021 conference sponsors and exhibitors by visiting the virtual trade show and featured products pavilion. Oh, and that's what that slide's about. All right. And lastly, don't forget to join us each morning for coffee chats and each evening for networking. I've been to one of each already and they're great, so I highly recommend them. And now I would like to introduce Elena Rogers. Elena is an area specialized agent with North Carolina State University and North Carolina Cooperative Extension, who provides educational programs, training, and technical support in the areas of fresh produce, safety to growers, extension agents, and the produce industry. Elena primarily works in the 50 western counties of North Carolina. Programmatic efforts include assistant with FSMA's produce safety rule implementation, GAP/food safety certifications, and working with the supply chain to ensure safety of fresh produce. Many things have changed this year, but one thing remains the same. Food safety, it's here to stay. And we must all do our part to make sure that we are following the guidelines that we are held accountable to. And Elena will walk us through the food safety rules and the decision tree process. So without further ado, here's Elena.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I appreciate it. And thank you for the opportunity to share with you this, what I feel is really relevant information to anyone who operates a roadside stand and also farms. So what I'm going to do today, and I'm going to go into my slides here. Let's see. Can you see the slides, Kelly? Yes. Okay, so what we're going to do today basically is help you figure out where you fall under the produce safety rule. And I have been in this position for about 4 years now, and this is a very common question, and there seems to be confusion as we go through the terminology and all that. So what I plan to do in the next, hopefully 20 minutes, is walk you through a process that will take you to successfully figure out where do you fall and what are your responsibilities under the rule. I have also reached out to the FDA Produce Safety Network specialist with some questions. So I do have, hopefully we can answer a lot of those questions. And if not, if there are questions that are still unanswered, we can hopefully find answers for you. Okay. So just as a reminder and as an introduction, I want to say that the produce safety rule, was basically that was passed by Congress in 2011. The rule came out in 2015, and in 2019, inspections started at farms across the U.S. and and anywhere that sells fruits or vegetables to the U.S. So, what is this regulation about? This regulation focuses on standards for the production, harvest, and handling of fruits and vegetables to ensure and to prevent microbial contamination and reduce foodborne illness. That is the intent of this law. What is interesting is that when it was written, they realized that not all farms could fit in the same place. Not all farms are the same. There are small, there are large farms. So, and there are other activities that also, would make FDA feel like produce cannot be treated the same. So they did develop this chart that a lot of you have probably seen, and it sort of, walks you through a decision tree, and you try to figure out where you fit. Well, there is a lot of information that's not there. So what we have done is we created basically a template, and the template is in your handouts that are provided with this session. So you can download it, and we'll talk about the template in a minute, okay? But what I do want to now, just kind of talking about the rule in general, I do want to mention that FDA did, under the produce safety rule, created 3 types of farms, okay? And the 3 types, why is this important? Because everyone is trying to figure out where they fit and what are their responsibilities. And so the first category of farms, just to make this pretty simple, is farms that are not covered by the produce safety rule. And I want to, in my own jargon, okay, say that these are small farms. Later, we will define what these farms are. The second category for farms are farms that are eligible for a qualified exemption and modified requirement. And this would probably usually more than likely cover farms that are either small and some medium scale farms, okay? And then there's a third category under the produce safety rule, which is called the covered farms. And these are probably more what you would consider a medium to a large scale farm and packing houses. And these are farms that are pretty big, and we'll during this exercise, we will define how a farm fits in one category versus the other. But I just want to keep in mind that these are the three categories where a farm or an operation can fit in. So as a vet reach out to me about, let's help anyone who's operating a roadside stand or a farm stand or a market figure out where they fit in the rule, okay? The first and most important question to ask yourself is your business, okay, is your roadside stand the same business as your farm? Is it one entity or are they two entities? Are they two separate businesses? If your farm, like in the example on the left, if like the answer is yes, they are one business. So for example, I have Green Valley Farms and I also operate a farm stand. If I consider those legally one business, okay, and so for example, for tax purposes or for, that's one business, then we're going to use the produce sales and the food sales. Those are numbers we're going to need later on to calculate where we fall under the produce safety rule. We're going to use the total produce sales and the food sales from both businesses. Okay, we're going to treat them as one. If you as a roadside stand operator or a market operator can tell me that your farm is one business and then the Green Valley market is a different business, like your farm stand is a separate business, then you are only going to use the numbers from your farm, okay? So in this case, Green Valley Farms, that's all the numbers, the produce sales, the food sales, that is all we're going to look. We're going to focus on the farm sales, okay? The rule doesn't necessarily cover places where food is sold. But it does, if you have structured your business in such a way that it's one, it's going to be hard to separate that. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, for obviously, again, going back, if your farm and roadside stand are the same business, okay, you will need to look and compile the last 3 years of produce sales. You'll need to do the last 3 years of food sales. And if you sell, especially if you have a market, make sure that you take out when you're looking at your sales that if you sell things that are crafts that are not food items, make sure that you are not counting those items when we're doing the calculations. So crafts, Christmas trees, furniture, home goods, a lot of those things, obviously they're not food, so make sure that when you're doing your calculations that you do not take them and you don't take them into consideration. The other important thing about this that I want to mention is that FDA, and we're going to use the term food throughout this as we do these calculations. So in a very simple way, FDA basically defines food as anything that humans or animals eat. So if you are, obviously selling fresh produce, that is considered food. But if you sell hay, okay, that's something that livestock would eat, then that is also considered food. In the case of like if you have pine trees, those are not edible, so that is not food. So just realize that this definition is really, really important as we move forward. Okay, you're still going to need these same numbers just for your farm if your farm is separate from your farm stand. Okay, the other important piece of information that I have to share before we start actually using the template is that when the rule was written or, passed by Congress in 2011, the original numbers that were written in the rule, the thresholds, for example, for produce sales was $25,000 back then. And then for food sales, it was $500,000. Those numbers are adjusted for inflation every year by FDA. So every year, those numbers are going to change. Today, we are using the template that we developed for 2020. So it has the numbers that were published by FDA last spring in March. Usually it's in March when they publish these. So we're going to use these numbers. So for produce sales, it was $28,075. And for food sales, it was $561,494. Those are the numbers that I'm using in the template to help you make your calculations. Just realize that this March, those numbers are probably going to go up, like in the produce sales category. I would expect maybe they're probably going to raise it by $1,000 or $2,000. And then the food sales, we have seen they raised it about, I don't know, $10,000 per year. So just realize that the template that you have in your resources is obviously using the numbers that were published for last year, and that this year those numbers will be, they'll be updated. But the process we're going to follow is the same every year. It's just those numbers are the ones that are going to change. So I do want to briefly talk about this document, the template for determining your farm status. And I just want to kind of tell you what it's in it, because I know you're probably not looking at it right now. But page 1 focuses on, we're going to do the math to figure out if a farm is not covered, okay? Then on page 2, we ask some questions that provide you all the information that you need to figure out if you are growing rarely consumed raw produce. And we also discuss the processing exemptions. So as we go through our decision tree, this is where you would answer those questions. And then pages 3, 4, and 5 actually are all the calculations and the information you need to figure out if you are a qualified exempt farm or not. Okay, and based on those calculations, if you are not qualified, if you're not eligible for a qualified exemption, then you would be considered a covered farm. And pages 5 and 6, at the end of this document, what we did is we summarized the general requirements and responsibilities that farms have under the produce safety rule. So obviously there's a lot more, but at least it gives you specific and clear guidance as to where you need to go. What's the next step once you've completed this template? Okay, so let's get started with this. And if we go to the template, and I apologize the way this come out, okay, so let's start with the template on page 1. And the first question that you need to ask yourself is like, do you only grow produce for personal consumption? I assume, obviously, if you're selling produce, you're growing produce, the answer is no. So that question, because any produce that is just grown for personal consumption is not produce that would ever be considered up for inspection or under the produce safety rule, okay? So if we said no, we're gonna move on to question number 2. And question number 2 has to do with produce sales. And at this point in time, we provide you with the definition of produce, just so you can see what is covered under that definition. And we're going to take the last 3 years of our sales. So I am obviously I'm doing the calculations for 2021. So I'm going to take the last 3 years of sales. I'm going to take 2018, 2019, and 2020. And I'm going to write down how much produce I sold. Again, this is where now you have to sort out what is fruits and vegetables versus what are other goods you could have sold from your farm. And you're going to divide it by 3 and you get a number. In this case, I get a number of $31,000. So that is over the threshold of $28,000 is $28,075 that was, published last year. So basically, I know I am not a not covered farm. Okay. And just realize the 2021 value will hopefully be coming soon. Now, as we move on to page 2, let's see. And I apologize again for how this came, but the question is, the next question we ask you is, do you only grow rarely consumed raw produce? And rarely consumed raw produce is basically an exhaustive list of, I believe it's 32 commodities that FDA considered at the time the rule was published that you usually would cook them before you eat them, or that the surveys that they use show that there's very low consumption in the US. So, I mean, these are things like potatoes, sweet potatoes, corns, beans, they are all there. And what happens is if these are the only commodities you grow, you are exempt from inspection. Okay, you are not these are not commodities that currently are being inspected by the inspectors that are looking at that are implementing the produce safety rule. So if that is all, if the commodities you grow, like let's say you grow sweet corn, and potatoes, if that is all you grow, you would basically state that, and usually if an inspector called you, you would provide them that information, and there would probably be no reason to come and do a regular inspection at your farm, regardless of the size. Okay. The next question, so that I hopefully, and again, we do provide more information on page 3 about that. The one thing I want to mention, and this is a common misunderstanding, is that the fact that you are growing one of these commodities that FDA considers that they are rarely consumed raw does not exempt you from the fact that you still have to make sure they are grown in a safe and sanitary manner, and that they are never considered adulterated produce if you're putting them in commerce. Okay. And that is part of the Food and Drug Cosmetic Act. That is not part, necessarily, obviously, under the produce safety rule. So do read, we do provide you in the template some additional information on that. Now, so we say no, we grow, we're growing greens, tomatoes, peppers. So the answer is no. We're going to go on to question number 4. And the question number 4 in our template says, do you grow produce that will be further processed in which there will be a kill step? And I should have probably added there that will be further commercially processed. This is produce that is going to commercial processors, and that during the processing, there is a kill step that will ensure that any pathogens that are there are, killed. So this applies, for example, for some of my apple growers that are selling to Gerber that, they're doing baby food, or if you are selling tomatoes to a processor that's canning them or putting them, so that in those situations, you want to be able to document what percentage or where are the tomatoes that are going to those, outlets, and making sure they are separate from the rest of the production in your farm, because that processor can provide you with some kind of documentation, and you could be exempt from inspection, okay, if that is where the produce in your farm is going. One important thing about that is that right now, that clause, okay, or that part of the produce safety rule as it pertains to commercial processing is on hold, basically. They are, it's under enforcement discretion, and basically FDA is revising the process because processors did complain that it can be a lot of paperwork. There's not like a standard form. And so they are looking at what is a better way to implement this part of the rule, okay? But again, if that is an outlet for your produce, then just realize that this is, included in the produce safety rule. So if the answer, just going down to the very bottom and back into the slides, if you answer yes to these questions, you may be exempt from the produce safety rule, okay? But you are still liable for growing safe produce under the Food and Drug Cosmetic Act. Okay, because we said no, we're going to move on, and we're going to move on to page 3 of our template. And now page 3 is where we get into the nitty-gritty of the how do we know if a farm is qualified exempt or not, okay? So again, for those operations that their farm market and their farm are one entity, okay, one entity, now we're going to look at all the food sales. If you tell me, no, my farm is separate from my roadside stand, I am only going to take the farm numbers, okay? And the farm sales is what I'm going to apply to this, okay? So let's look at, there are 2 requirements in order to determine if you're qualified exempt or not. The first one is that the average food sales for the farm, okay, in 2020 had to be less than $561,494. And that is for the average of the years in 2018, 19, and 20. It's always the last 3 years, okay? The second requirement is that the majority of those food sales that the farm made were to qualified end users during that time frame. So we will talk about qualified end users in a minute and show you who they are. Just again, as a reminder, I want to say that that figure, 561,494, is going to change probably in the month of March, and we will have an updated number. However, the process we're going to follow is still the same. So just another thing, as we're calculating the food sales, okay, for these 3 years, make sure you include any food, any produce, anything that, again, meets the definition of food that you grew, or if the farm bought and resold it as a farm. Let's say you bought from someone else and to meet a contract, or you need to make sure you include those sales and in your numbers, okay? So how do we do the math calculations for this? So for example, here in my farm, Green Valley Farms, here are the sales for the last 3 years. I have added them up, I've divided them by 3, and I found out that I had sales of 536,666. That's pretty straightforward. So my question is, are the average food sales under 561,000 for the last 3 years? And the answer is no, because they are less, okay? So because these are less, now we're going to go and look at the second requirement and see if I meet that second requirement. If my calculations had been, if the average sales for the last 3 years had been $600,000, I would have automatically said, I don't meet this requirement. I am a covered farm. But because my sales are under this threshold that was published by FDA last year, then I can go on to requirement number 2 and figure out where I fit. So now let's talk a little bit, as we talk about requirement number 2, the majority of food sales must be made to qualified end users. So who are qualified end users? Who are these people? So qualified end users are anyone who is actually the consumer of the food. If you're selling directly to the consumer, they are considered qualified end users. So this would include anyone you sold to from your farm, directly from your farm, if you sold to them through a farmer's market, through a CSA, even internet sales. As long as you're selling directly to who's going to eat the food, they are considered qualified end users. Now, also, there's another category of qualified end users, and those are retail food establishments. And basically, retail food establishments are restaurants and grocery stores. And, farm stands are considered retail food establishments. As long as that is, who's selling directly to the end consumer, those sales are also included. When they wrote the rule, they said that the grocery stores had to be within 275 miles of your farm. So just keep that in mind. Okay. So if, again, we're going to look at all these people and say, did we sell to them or not? Did we sell the majority of our food to them? So what I did here on this, I simplified it, okay, in this slide. And basically, and sometimes it's very easy for most farmers to tell me, hey, I do sell to A, or most of my sales are to B. But if we look at these 2 tables here, okay, and we look at, these boxes, and we look at box A, okay, in box A, I have all the qualified end users. So anyone who was a consumer of the food, anyone who I sold through a farmer's market, a CSA, or internet sales. If I sold directly to restaurants and grocery stores within the 275 miles of my farm, did I sell the majority of my produce, of my food, over the last 3 years to them or not? Or on the other hand, did I do business with who did I do most of my business with? Did I do most of my business with actually businesses? Okay, did I do most of my business with brokers? Did I do most of my business with processors? Did I do most of my business with distribution centers? Or did I sell to grocery stores that are more than 275 miles from your farm? So that's the question you need to ask yourself, okay? And So again, some farmers tell me, hey, I sell most of it directly. I sell it through my farm stand, or I sell it at farmers market. So if you say, yes, that's where I sold to, it's fine. You would just have A, and you would have met the requirements for a qualified exemption. However, sometimes it's not as easy to just try to think about it. So that's why our template, we went on and we put together these tables, okay? And I just want to show you what we do is this is an easy way to do the math. So what we have on page 4 of our template, okay, is a table. And the top part of that table is a table where you can do the calculations for your qualified end users. So you can say, okay, did I sell? How much were my sales directly to consumers, okay, every year? And you can see I placed some values on 2018, 2019, 2020. And then if I had sold to grocery stores, I would have included them here under the retail food establishments. And here I did my math, and I come to find out that I sold $233,000, okay? Just that I sold to qualified end users. Now, I need to do the same with my other businesses that I sold to that are not qualified end users. And so again, just to break it down, who would those non-qualified end users are? If you sell through a broker, the broker is not a qualified end user. If you sell to a distribution center, and that is something that I will suggest that if that is the case, that you talk to your someone, a representative from, your Department of Agriculture, or because sometimes it just depends on how the invoices are coming. Sometimes you're delivering directly to the grocery store, and they give you, when they pay you, they're paying you, and basically it says I sold to Publix. But let's say if you do business with Publix, you would be probably bringing your produce to a distribution center. You would not be bringing it to a store. So just realize that the way that at least the language is written right now, distribution centers are not qualified end users, okay? Retail food establishments, any more that are located more than 275 miles from your farm are not. Again, processors, if you told me, most of my business I've done with Gerber, but I do have a little bit of produce that I sell on my farm stand, that the sales to the processor would go here. So again, I used some numbers just to show you. And when I did my calculations, if I did this math, I found out that I was selling $270,000 over the last 3 years, average, okay? Average sales over the last 3 years. And what does that mean? It means that at the end of the day, I sold more food, okay, to non-qualified end users. So because of that, are the majority of my sales to qualified end users, I have to say no. And, so what happens here is that if I were to say yes, okay, if my calculations had been the other way around, the farm would be eligible for a qualified exemption. And in a minute, I'll show you what that means. But if you say no, automatically the now FDA says, okay, you are not eligible for this exemption. You are considered a covered farm. And just as in a way of a summary, these are what are the requirements for these 3 different types of farms. Farms that are not covered have basically no requirements. We strongly suggest that everyone fills out this page number 1 and keep it as a record just to be on track. Then we have the qualified exemption. Under the qualified exemption, just realize that you do need a written record. So this record, as you put it together and as you add statements or you add receipts for your sales and all that, can serve as your document that shows that you are, hopefully proving that you're qualified exempt or not. But if you are qualified exempt, there are some special labeling requirements that I'm not going to talk about today. And then again, you're still responsible for making sure that the produce is safe, and you are not subject to regular inspections if you are qualified exempt. I do want to make that clear. But on the other hand, qualified exemption can be taken anytime there's a problem. Like FDA has the right, or the Department of Ag has the right to withdraw that exemption if the conditions are not met. And last but not least, covered farms, they are subject to inspections, and that's where oftentimes we would consider that more the medium to large size farms are probably going to be over that $500,000 threshold, or they're going to be doing a lot of business, maybe not directly through to qualified end users. So what are the expectations are that someone from the farm attends a Produce Safety Alliance training, and that's the person that's making the decisions and assessing risk and working to put together, to really advance the culture of food safety and make sure that the practices in the rule are followed at the farm. And then covered farms are also responsible for implementing all the practices outlined in the produce safety rule on a timely manner. Okay, so with that, this is our website, NC Fresh Produce Safety. This is where, if you go to the left-hand column under the second or third tab, there is a tab that's called FSMA. That is where we house all our documents and information. We really try to, I guess not necessarily translate, but just provide information that comes from the rule that's hopefully easy to understand and that helps our growers, follow the guidelines. And with that, here's my contact information. And if I can be of any help, I do say we have a few questions, but please feel free to reach out, or, we'll put you in contact with whoever the contact is in your state, or, try to help you find answers to the questions that you may have. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. And Kelly?
Thank you. Let's see if I can go back to my final two slides, although...
Hold on. I do have a few questions. Do you want to go ahead and you want me to answer those now, or?
Yes. Hold on just 1 second. Yes, we have two questions. And so I want to remind the folks from the audience, if you have questions, go ahead and be submitting them now. And also those who are reminding those who are getting pesticide credits to make sure you sign out in the chat box with their first name, last name, and their states. All right, question number 1. Does contract work count towards the total farm sales? For example, a farmer grows covered produce and raises chickens for Tyson, but Tyson actually owns the chickens. Would payment for raising the chickens be factored into all the food sales to determine where the fall falls under FSMA?
Yes. So, so that is a popular question. And in North Carolina, we do have a lot of growers in that situation. So the answer is, like, when you are growing, you are growing chickens or hogs, and you are on growing on contract, okay, you are actually not getting paid for the costs. You are only getting paid for your services, for husbandry services. So you would not have proof that you have food sales. I mean, those, even though they were raised at they were at your farm, these animals were raised at your farm or this livestock, there is no receipts for those food sales. So no, you would not count those. However, just think about the fact that if you had pasture poultry and you're not contracting that pasture poultry, you're selling those chickens, those would be considered food sales because you raised the chickens and you sold them and you had ownership of the chickens. But if you did not own the chickens, which is the terminology that is used, and you're just getting paid for husbandry services, those are not included. Those fees would not be included.
Okay, great. And the second question is, would pumpkins fall under this rule?
So pumpkins are considered rarely consumed produce and rarely consumed raw. So no, they are not included in this rule. So your pumpkin sales would not, they would be considered, you would consider them for total sales, but they are not inspected. If you had to be inspected, your pumpkins would not be inspected under the rule.
All right, we can give it maybe just a minute more if there's anyone else who has a question. I had a question, which was, how do we get the pamphlet that you're talking about, the different pages?
It should be in the documents that are uploaded as the resources, I believe. I I provided it with the document, when I provided my presentation, but it is also in our website, NC Fresh Produce Safety. If you go there, again, under the FSMA tab, it will be on the left-hand column. When you click on FSMA, you will see that there will be one that says, where do I fall under the produce safety rule? And you can download it from there. As soon as the numbers are updated by FDA this spring, we will update our template. So you will make you can do this as a preliminary exercise, but as soon as we have the numbers for, you can use the new template for this year.
Awesome. It's good timing. Good timing.
Yeah, good timing. But yes. So if there's not, I'll be glad to help any way I can, again, or connect you with resources in your state. So
awesome. Well, that is all the time that we have. Thank you, Elena, for your time and your expertise. And to all the attendees, thank you for attending this presentation. Don't forget to sign out for the pesticide credits. All educational presentations and virtual trade show will be available for you to access until April 30th. So come back if you missed a presentation, if you want to rewatch this one and others, or if you need to search a service or product provider in the virtual trade show. Again, thank you for your participation, and this concludes this presentation.